Ava had always been a stunningly beautiful girl, with piercing green eyes and raven black hair that cascaded down her back like a waterfall. She had a petite frame, but her presence was larger than life. Men would often stop and stare as she walked by, mesmerized by her ethereal beauty. But Ava's life wasn't as perfect as it seemed. Her mother, Maria, had been struggling to make ends meet, working multiple jobs just to put food on the table. Ava's father had left them when she was just a child, and Maria had been raising her on her own ever since. One day, Maria came to Ava with a proposal. "Ava, I've been thinking," she said, her voice hesitant. "I've been talking to Mr. Jenkins, and he's interested in marrying you." Ava was taken aback. Mr. Jenkins was a wealthy businessman in his late 50s, with a reputation for being ruthless in his dealings. His first wife had passed away a few years ago, leaving him with a vast fortune and a sprawling mansion. But Ava's mother was insistent. "He's a good man, Ava," she said. "He'll take care of us, provide for us. We'll never have to worry about money again." Ava was torn. On the one hand, she didn't want to disappoint her mother. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that marrying Mr. Jenkins would be a mistake. As she looked into her mother's pleading eyes, Ava knew what she had to do. "Okay, Mother," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it." The wedding was a grand affair, with hundreds of guests in attendance. Ava looked stunning in her white wedding gown, but her heart was heavy with doubt. As she exchanged vows with Mr. Jenkins, Ava couldn't help but feel like she was making a mistake. She was sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of her mother's security. But as she looked into Mr. Jenkins' eyes, Ava saw something there that gave her pause. It was a deep sadness, a sense of loss that seemed to permeate his very being. And in that moment, Ava realized that she wasn't the only one who was sacrificing something. Mr. Jenkins was sacrificing his own happiness, his own chance at love, for the sake of companionship. As they danced at the reception, Ava felt a sense of unease. She knew that she had a long and difficult road ahead of her, but she was determined to make the best of it. And as she looked into Mr. Jenkins' eyes, Ava saw a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this marriage of convenience could turn into something more. Ava had been married to Mr. Jenkins for a few weeks now, and she was still adjusting to her new life. She had moved into his sprawling mansion, and was still getting used to the opulent decor and the army of servants that catered to her every whim. But despite the luxuries, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She longed for a sense of connection, of family. And then, one day, Mr. Jenkins told her that his children from his late wife would be coming to visit. Ava's heart skipped a beat as she wondered what to expect. The daughter, Emily, was 19 years old, and Ava had heard that she was a beautiful and fiery young woman. The son, James, was 11 years old, and Ava had been told that he was a sweet and curious boy. As Ava waited nervously in the living room, she heard the sound of the door opening. She turned to see Emily and James walking towards her, accompanied by their father. Emily was even more beautiful than Ava had imagined, with long blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. James, on the other hand, was a miniature version of his father, with a mop of messy brown hair and a wide smile. As they approached, Ava felt a sense of nervousness. She didn't know what to expect, or how they would react to her. But as soon as Emily and James smiled at her, Ava felt a sense of relief. They seemed warm and welcoming, and Ava couldn't help but feel drawn to them. "Hi," Emily said, extending her hand. "I'm Emily." "Hi," Ava replied, shaking her hand. "I'm Ava." James, who had been quietly observing the exchange, suddenly piped up. "Hi, Ava," he said, his voice squeaking with excitement. "I'm James." Ava smiled, feeling a sense of warmth towards the young boy. "Hi, James," she said, ruffling his hair. As they spent more time together, Ava found herself growing more and more comfortable with Emily and James. They were easy to talk to, and Ava found herself laughing and joking with them as if they were old friends. As the day drew to a close, Ava realized that she had been dreading this meeting for nothing. Emily and James were wonderful, and she was grateful to have them in her life. As they said their goodbyes, Emily turned to Ava and smiled. "We're glad you're here, Ava," she said. "You seem really nice." Ava's heart swelled with emotion. "Thank you, Emily," she said. "I'm glad to be here." As Ava watched Emily and James drive away, she felt a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had found a new family, a new sense of belonging. And as she turned to Mr. Jenkins, she saw a look of gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Ava," he said. "You're going to make a wonderful stepmother." Ava smiled, feeling a sense of warmth towards her new husband. "I'll try my best," she said. As they walked back into the house, Ava felt a sense of excitement. She knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life, a chapter filled with love, laughter, and family. Ava was settling into her new life with Mr. Jenkins, and things were starting to feel more normal. She had grown to love Emily and James, and they had become like a family to her. But just as things were starting to calm down, Mr. Jenkins dropped a bombshell. "Ava, I want you to meet my nephew, Alexander," he said, a mischievous glint in his eye. Ava's heart skipped a beat as she turned to see a young, handsome man walking towards her. He had chiseled features, piercing blue eyes, and a charming smile. But what really caught Ava's attention was the look of recognition on Alexander's face. She knew that she had seen him before, but she couldn't quite place him. And then, it hit her. Alexander was the ex-boyfriend of her close friend, Sarah. Ava had heard all about their tumultuous relationship, and she knew that Sarah still had feelings for him. As Ava tried to process this new information, she noticed that Emily was staring at Alexander with a look of admiration. Ava's heart sank as she realized that Emily might have feelings for her cousin. The tension in the room was palpable as Ava tried to navigate this complicated web of relationships. She knew that she had to tread carefully, or risk hurting someone she cared about. As the evening wore on, Ava found herself drawn to Alexander's charming and charismatic personality. But she knew that she couldn't let her feelings get the better of her. She was married to Mr. Jenkins, and she had to respect her vows. As the night drew to a close, Ava couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would Emily and Alexander develop feelings for each other? And how would Sarah react when she found out that Alexander was now a part of Ava's life? The questions swirled in Ava's mind as she tried to make sense of this complicated new dynamic. One thing was for sure, life was about to get a lot more interesting. As the days went by, Ava found herself spending more and more time with Alexander. They would talk for hours, sharing stories and laughter, and Ava couldn't help but feel drawn to him. At first, she tried to brush off her feelings, telling herself that she was married and that it was wrong to have feelings for her husband's nephew. But as she got to know Alexander better, she realized that she couldn't deny her attraction to him. Alexander, too, had started to develop feelings for Ava. He was captivated by her beauty, her intelligence, and her kindness. He loved the way she made him laugh, the way she listened to him, and the way she made him feel like he was the only person in the world. As they spent more time together, their feelings for each other grew stronger. They would steal glances at each other, their eyes locking in a way that made them both feel like they were melting. But they knew that they had to keep their feelings a secret. Mr. Jenkins, Emily, and James would never understand. They would think that Ava was betraying her husband, and that Alexander was being disloyal to his uncle. So they kept their feelings hidden, sneaking around to spend time together whenever they could. They would meet in secret, exchanging sweet texts and whispered promises. As the days turned into weeks, their secret attraction grew stronger. They knew that they couldn't keep their feelings hidden forever, but for now, they were content to savor the thrill of their forbidden love. But as they navigated the complexities of their secret relationship, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with fire. Would they be able to keep their feelings hidden, or would their secret attraction be discovered, threatening to tear the family apart? Emily had been spending a lot of time with Alexander, and Ava had noticed that she seemed to be developing feelings for him. At first, Ava thought it was just a harmless crush, but as the days went by, Emily's feelings for Alexander only seemed to grow stronger. One day, Emily approached her father, Mr. Jenkins, with a shocking proposal. "Dad, I want to marry Alexander," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Mr. Jenkins was taken aback. He had always thought of Alexander as a nephew, not a potential son-in-law. But as he looked at Emily's determined face, he knew that he couldn't say no. Alexander, however, was not so sure. He had always thought of Emily as a cousin, and the idea of marrying her made him uncomfortable. But as he looked at Mr. Jenkins, he knew that he couldn't say no either. Mr. Jenkins had helped Alexander out financially many times, and Alexander felt a deep sense of gratitude towards him. He knew that he couldn't disappoint his uncle, no matter how he felt about Emily. So, with a heavy heart, Alexander agreed to marry Emily. Ava was shocked when she heard the news, and she couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She had been developing feelings for Alexander herself, and the thought of him marrying Emily was almost too much to bear. As the engagement was announced, Ava put on a brave face, congratulating Emily and Alexander on their upcoming wedding. But inside, she was torn apart by conflicting emotions. She knew that she had to keep her feelings hidden, but it was getting harder and harder to pretend that everything was okay. As the wedding preparations began, Ava found herself drawn into a web of deceit and secrets. She knew that she couldn't keep her feelings hidden forever, but for now, she was trapped in a living nightmare, forced to watch the man she loved prepare to marry another woman. Ava's emotions had been simmering just below the surface, but as the wedding preparations continued, she couldn't keep her feelings hidden anymore. She became increasingly jealous and angry, her mind racing with thoughts of Alexander and Emily's upcoming marriage. One day, as she was helping Emily with her wedding dress, Ava's emotions boiled over. She couldn't bear the thought of Alexander marrying another woman, and she lashed out at Emily in a fit of rage. "You can't marry him!" Ava shouted, her voice echoing through the room. "He's not right for you. He's. Ava's words trailed off as she realized that she had almost revealed her true feelings. Emily was taken aback by Ava's outburst. "What's wrong with you, Ava?" she asked, her voice shaking with confusion. "I thought you were happy for me." Ava took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "I'm sorry, Emily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just don't think this marriage is a good idea." Emily's face hardened. "You're just saying that because you're jealous," she accused. "You're jealous that Alexander is marrying me instead of you." Ava's eyes widened in shock. How did Emily know? She hadn't told anyone about her feelings for Alexander. But before Ava could respond, Emily stormed out of the room, leaving Ava feeling guilty, angry, and confused. As the days went by, Ava's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would lash out at Emily and Alexander, and then burst into tears, unable to explain why she was so upset. It was clear that Ava's emotions were spiraling out of control, but what wasn't clear was what would happen next. Would Ava's feelings for Alexander be revealed, or would she find a way to keep them hidden? Ava knew she had to act fast. With the wedding just days away, she couldn't bear the thought of Alexander marrying Emily. She had to warn him, to make him see that he was making a mistake. One night, Ava snuck out of the house and made her way to Alexander's room. She knocked softly on the door, her heart racing with anticipation. Alexander answered, looking surprised to see Ava standing there. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. Ava took a deep breath, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Alexander, don't marry Emily," she said, her voice urgent. "You don't love her. You're only doing this because of your uncle." Alexander looked taken aback by Ava's words. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice guarded. Ava's eyes locked onto his, her gaze burning with intensity. "I know you don't love Emily," she repeated. "And I know you're only marrying her because you feel obligated to your uncle." Alexander sighed, his shoulders sagging in defeat. "You're right," he admitted. "I don't love Emily. But I have to marry her. I owe it to my uncle." Ava's face fell, her heart sinking in despair. "You're going to throw away your happiness for a sense of obligation?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry, Ava. I really am. But I have to do this." Ava's eyes flashed with determination. No, you don't, she said, her voice firm. We can run away together. We can start a new life, just the two of us. Alexander's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, Ava thought she saw a glimmer of hope. But then his face hardened, and he shook his head. I'm sorry, Ava, he repeated. I really am. But I'm going to marry Emily. Ava's heart shattered into a million pieces as she realized that Alexander was determined to go through with the wedding. She turned and ran, leaving Alexander standing alone in the darkness. As Ava's behavior became increasingly erratic, Mr. Jenkins couldn't help but notice that something was amiss. He had always thought of Ava as a calm and rational person, but lately, she seemed to be on edge. At first, Mr. Jenkins had attributed Ava's behavior to stress and anxiety, but as the days went by, he began to suspect that there was more to it. He started to notice that Ava seemed to be avoiding him, and when they did talk, she seemed distant and preoccupied. One day, as they were sitting down to dinner, Mr. Jenkins confronted Ava about her behavior. Ava, what's going on? He asked, his voice firm but concerned. You've been acting strange lately, and I want to know what's wrong. Ava hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She knew that she couldn't tell Mr. Jenkins about her feelings for Alexander, but she also didn't want to lie to him. I'm just stressed, that's all, she said finally, trying to brush off his concerns. But Mr. Jenkins wasn't convinced. He knew Ava too well, and he could see the guilt written all over her face. Ava, I know you're hiding something from me, he said, his voice low and serious. I want you to tell me what's going on. Ava felt a surge of panic as she realized that Mr. Jenkins was onto her. She knew that she had to think fast, or risk losing everything. But before she could come up with a response, Mr. Jenkins's phone rang, interrupting the tense moment. As he answered the call, Ava let out a sigh of relief. She knew that she had just been given a temporary reprieve, but she also knew that she couldn't keep her secrets hidden forever. Mr. Jenkins's eyes widened in shock as he listened to the voice on the other end of the phone. It was one of his business associates, and he had some disturbing news to share. Ava's been having an affair with Alexander, the associate said, his voice firm. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but I thought you had a right to know. Mr. Jenkins felt like he had been punched in the gut. He couldn't believe that Ava would betray him like that. He felt a wave of anger wash over him, but he knew he had to keep his cool. He thanked the associate for the information and hung up the phone. He took a deep breath and went to find Ava. Ava was in their bedroom, packing a suitcase. She looked up and saw Mr. Jenkins standing in the doorway, his eyes blazing with anger. You're leaving me? He asked, his voice cold. Ava nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she said. I never meant to hurt you. Mr. Jenkins laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. You never meant to hurt me? He repeated. You've been having an affair with my nephew, and you never meant to hurt me? Ava shook her head, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm sorry, she repeated. I love him. Mr. Jenkins's face twisted in disgust. You love him? He spat. You don't even know what love is. Ava's eyes flashed with anger, but she knew she was in the wrong. She turned and ran out of the room, leaving Mr. Jenkins standing alone. The next day, the police found Ava's body in the river. She had taken her own life, unable to bear the shame and guilt of her actions. The news of Ava's death sent shockwaves through the family. Alexander was devastated, and he became withdrawn and isolated. He never recovered from the loss of Ava, and he eventually became a recluse, unable to bear the pain of his memories. The wedding between Alexander and Emily was cancelled, and Emily was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered heart. Mr. Jenkins was left to mourn the loss of his wife, and to wonder what he could have done differently to prevent her tragic demise. The family was never the same again, and the memory of Ava's tragic fate haunted them for the rest of their lives.